Okay, so we have looked at how to use these pins as outputs, and now what we're going to look at today is using them to bring information in. And so we can think about, if we're looking at, if you have a computer or some type of device, what makes it useful is it has some kind of combination of inputs and outputs. So for example, your computer has output devices like a monitor, possibly, right, you have speakers, maybe a printer, and there could be other types of output devices, but those are kind of just a few of them. And then we can also output data through like the USB ports, etc. And then it also has input devices like the mouse, maybe a camera, keyboard, microphone, etc. And so you have combinations of inputs and outputs. And so we're going to just start to barely scrape the surface on that right now by looking at using this to take information in, and the basic kind of function that we use to do that. And so any of the pins that we can use as an output, we can actually also use as an input. So that's taking in information. This is kind of like how we get information from the world around us. Now, us as people, we have very complex and rich ways that we can take information in from the world around us, right? We have our five senses, which are very complex and can do many, many things far beyond what computers can do. But this microcontroller, it doesn't have those things. It only has these digital pins here in which you can read basically whether the voltage is high or low. Okay? And we'll learn that we actually have a little bit more complexity. For example, we have these analog inputs, and we'll learn more about that later. And then you can get all kinds of external sensors that can expand beyond that. But for now, we're just going to focus on this basic input. Okay? So if we come into Arduino IDE, Arduino Create here, and so here we have a blank sketch that we'll start with. And so if we want to take in information, just so we're going to start with that pin mode function, right? So just like before, we can set the pin mode, okay, using this function. But this time, instead of setting it as an input, we can set it as output. So we'll pick a pin, we'll say pin 8, and we'll set pin 8 as an output. Okay, and once this is done, now pin 8 can function as an output, and I think it's possible probably to switch it back and forth in the same sketch as an input versus an output, but we're using as an output here. I think it's easier if you just keep it at 1. And then what we can do is we can do a digital read. So instead of writing, we have another function here called digital read that will read whatever that pin is. Okay, now most of the functions that we've used so far are what we call void functions that don't take in any information. But what we're going to do now is, using digital read, we can take in information and we can store that information into a variable. So we want to do something with it, and so we're going to make a variable here, be an integer. We'll call it button status, and we can assign it there. You might be able to also do like a serial print to print that, and we can do serial dot begin, right? Add that in. The 9600 for the baud rate, and then you could do some kind of serial dot print ln like that to print our button status. Okay, now maybe add a short delay so we can interpret the data. Okay, so I'm gonna actually go ahead and plug in my device here, which is wired with a button, and we'll see what it does. Okay, so I'll flip this around. Nope. Okay, so now we have our button connected, and you can see I've got the serial monitor running over here on the side, and what we will do is, so I've got this going right now. And then I will go ahead, and you're not going to be able to see this, and partly this is for a reason, but I'm going to change I'm going to press this button so we can see what that looks like when we get the reading. So let's click the button here, and you can see it switches to a 1 when the button is pressed, and when I unpress the button, it goes back to 0. Okay? And so just like with the digital write, where its status could be high or low, the same thing happens here. And then these words, high and low, they're kind of like variables, and there's a different name for it. We can probably get into that more later, but high just represents the number 1, and low represents the 0. And so when the button is high, when it's connected to 5 volts, we get button status equal to 1. When it's connected to 0 volts, we get the button status equal to low. Okay, and I can just print the 1 or the 0 instead of the high or the low. Okay, we'll go over here to Tinkercad, and I'll show you how to wire it. So we've got one end of the button connected to pin 8. The other end is connected to the 5-volt rail here, which is then connected to the 5-volt pin here. Okay, and it's pretty simple. You see I've got a wire here going to the ground. It's currently unnecessary. I can delete this. Okay, and so it's a really simple connection, and this will allow you to take readings from the button. Now, I will just make a note here. This isn't going to work right. Okay, this isn't going to do what you want. It's going to cause some problems, and we'll come back and talk about that in the next video, what those problems are.